The prince liked to lock us in the storeroom when he was angry. That's how it started. At first, we thought it was just his temper, something spoiled princes do when they don't get their way. But it got worse. Much worse. I worked as a maid in the palace for a year. My family needed the money, and working there seemed like an honor at first. But no one warned me about Prince Ode. He was young, maybe 22 or 23, but he already acted like the world was beneath him. The other maids whispered about him, how he liked to punish girls, but I didn't believe it. I thought they were exaggerating, trying to scare the new girl. I was wrong. One night, he called me into his suite to clean up a spill. It was late, and I was the only one still awake. When I got there, the room smelled like alcohol and smoke. He was lounging on the couch, watching me. His eyes never left me. I remember my hands shaking as I wiped the table because his stare felt heavy, like he was waiting for something. Then, he started asking questions. Personal questions. Was I married? Did I have a boyfriend? Was I a virgin? I tried to laugh it off, said I needed to get back to my chores, but he stood up and blocked the door. He forced himself on me. I tried to scream, but he overpowered me and covered my mouth. He hit me hard. I couldn't take it anymore. I passed out. That was the first time he touched me. After that, it was like he thought he owned me. If I didn't smile at him or greet him properly, he'd punish me. There was no one to relate to, he had his way severally. I felt like ending it all. The prince was not just brutal but also cornered. He kept all his affairs from the king. To the king he's a perfect child, he always behaved whenever the king was around. Any day I refused to serve him, he'd humiliate me in front of the other staff, saying things like, "She thinks she's too good for me." But the worst was when he'd corner me alone, his breath reeking of whiskey, and threatened to fire me, or worse, if I told anyone. It was unbearable. I had to act fast, but I didn't know what to do or what steps to take. I wasn't the only one. All the younger maids were scared of him. We avoided him when we could, but in the palace, that wasn't always possible. One girl, Adana, tried to stand up to him. She slapped his hand away when he tried to grab her. The next day, her family got a letter saying she'd been dismissed for theft. We all knew it was a lie, but no one dared to challenge him. The palace guards. They knew. The head maid. She knew too. But no one did anything. He was the prince, and we were just mates. Replaceable. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my cousin, who worked as a driver outside the palace. He said I should leave, but where would I go? My family depended on my wages. If I left, I'd have nothing. Eventually, though, I had to make a choice. After he cornered me again, he was drunk. "You know you are a beautiful girl. You deserve to be the princess, don't you want to be rich? You know I can help you," he'd say. "I don't want anything from you, just leave me alone," I fired back. He became furious and locked the door when I attempted to escape him. He pushed me, I hit my head on the bed, I became weak, my head began to spin, I felt him taking off my clothes. It was painful, I felt him inside me. He had his way until I passed out. I wasn't myself throughout the whole week. I treated myself. The head maid made sure I took some pills to avoid complications. It was the only help she could render. I couldn't bear it anymore, so I packed my things and ran. I didn't even tell my family. I just left. I moved to another city, found a job at a small restaurant, and tried to forget. But you don't forget something like that. You carry it with you. The last I heard, Prince Ode is still in the palace, still living his life like nothing happened. I don't know if any of the other girls ever spoke out, but I doubt it. Who would believe us? He's a prince, after all. Years later, Prince Ade sat at the edge of the dusty road, his clothes tattered, his stomach growling from another day without food. The once proud heir to the throne was now a shadow of his former self, hunched over, begging for scraps in a city far away from his father's kingdom. His hands trembled as he scratched his unkempt beard, remembering the life he used to have: silken robes, grand feasts, and maids who couldn't say no. But those days were gone. It had started with whispers. A young maid, Sade, had finally dared to speak out, accusing him of abuse. Her courage inspired others to step forward. One by one, the palace walls echoed with the stories of his cruelty, his manipulation, his acts of violence. Sade brought evidence against him. Videotapes and recordings. It was undeniable. The scandal erupted like wildfire. The king, furious at the shame brought upon their family name, stripped Ade of his titles and wealth. Before he was apprehended, Ade escaped. The police searched for him but never found him. 3 years later, for the first time in his life, Ade had to face a reality without power, privilege, or protection. The money he left with was squandered in a few months, on cheap liquor, gambling, and fleeting pleasures that gave him no solace. Soon, he was penniless, alone, and forgotten by everyone who once fawned over him. Meanwhile, across the city, the girl whose life he had once tried to destroy was thriving. Fumaleo had rebuilt herself after leaving the palace. A chance encounter at the restaurant where she worked brought her into the life of a kind-hearted businessman, Emeka. He listened to her story, saw her strength, and fell deeply in love with her. They married within a year, and together, they started a company, one that grew rapidly under their leadership. Years later, fate brought Ade and Fumaleo face to face again. Ade, now desperate for work, had wandered into a job fair. He didn't know the company's name, nor did he care. All he wanted was a chance to earn a living and eat a proper meal. The HR staff gave him a form and asked him to wait in the lobby for an interview. When the door opened, Ade froze. Fumaleo walked in, poised and elegant, her husband by her side. Her eyes locked on Ade, and for a moment, the air felt heavy with the weight of the past. Ade's mouth went dry as he tried to avoid her gaze, but it was no use. She recognized him immediately. Fumaleo, he stammered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know. Prince Ade, she said, her voice calm but cold. Or should I say, just Ade. He couldn't speak. His head hung low as the realization of his downfall hit him like a wave. The girl he had once tormented was now sitting at the helm of the very company where he sought a job. And beside her was Emeka, who clearly knew everything. Emeka leaned forward, his voice sharp. You don't deserve to be in this room. You don't deserve even the chance to ask for a job. But Fumaleo is kinder than you deserve, and she insisted we hear you out. Ade couldn't hold back the tears. He mumbled an apology, but Fumaleo stopped him. Save it, she said, standing up. You made your choices, Ade. And now, you're living with them. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. You'll never work here. And I hope you finally learn what it means to live without the power you abused. As Ade walked out of the building, the weight of his disgrace felt heavier than ever. He had lost everything, his family, his wealth, and now, even his dignity. For the first time, he understood the pain he had inflicted on others. But it was too late for redemption. The security were waiting outside to hand him over to the police. Before this, Fumaleo had reunited with her family after 2 years of running away from the palace. When she ran away from the palace, the royal family, through Prince Ade's manipulation, told the family she ran away after trying to seduce him but failed. Her family were disappointed. They begged the royal family to forgive them, not really understanding the truth. Fumaleo, now rich and wealthy, returned home to find her family still struggling. She explained to them what really transpired. with the help of her cousin brother who she told of her predicament 2 years ago. The family realized how wrong they were after all this time. They apologized for not trusting her and believing the prince's lies. Fonmileo's mother could not forgive herself. No woman should go through what Fonmileo went through. The family was happy for her return but yet broken inside. The royal family took much than they had bargained and it must be paid back. Fonmileo advised them to calm down as she has a plan. Her battle is with the prince and no one else. Through her wealth and influence she created the perfect plan for Prince Sade's downfall. She hired a girl to pose as someone looking for work in the palace. She made sure the lady she hired was beautiful and curvy, someone Prince Sade would never rest until he find his way with. It was the girl who had exposed him. Sade was sent to pretend as a palace maid. She was quickly recruited as the prince was the one who made sure of who stays and who goes in the palace. Unknown to him, it was his downfall. Sade didn't struggle with him. She toyed with him and made him confess all his mayhem. She equally planted camera in his room as she had access as his favorite. For once Prince Sade has thought about even settling down with her as his wife. She was a beauty to behold, no man could resist, at least not this sex addict of a prince. She made him fall in love so deep, he never suspected anything. He still commits his atrocities, but this time all the maids were ready for him. Through Sade's help they got recorded evidence of him trying to force himself on them severally. Sade finally played her card when the king was around, she reported Sade. At first the king refused to believe and wanted to push the case under the carpet. But Fonmileo and her husband's influence played a major role. They made sure the authorities did their job perfectly without bias, and also the evidence against the prince was too strong to be pushed aside. All the palace maids who had been abused stood as witnesses and victims of his mayhem. The king was left with no choice but to disown his only son. He was stripped of his princely title as was the custom. The maids who were victims of his abuse were compensated handsomely, even though the memory was something they'd have to live with for the rest of their lives. Fonmileo's revenge was taken